Welcome to The Middle, a podcast about that messy middle in between job loss and the comeback, told by people who've lived it. From CEOs to veterans, athletes to analysts, we talk to folks navigating the unexpected turns in their careers and what comes next when the plan falls apart. These honest conversations will move you, make you think, and maybe even inspire you to leap into something new. Because behind every career pivot is someone just trying to figure it all out. Do you have a dog? Did I ask you this?
Yes, she's very chatty. I have a 12-year-old German Shepherd named Maud. She is a piece of work, that one. But, as she's gotten older, she's only become more of herself. That's, I think, true for most of us.
The very first dog, I didn't grow up with dogs. I had cats growing up, and I always wanted a dog, but my parents wouldn't do it. So about 2 weeks before I graduated from Michigan State, I went out and bought a German Shepherd puppy. Like, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. I had an apartment by myself at that point. Just went out and bought a puppy, and my parents were so mad. But she was the best dog. Her name was Sadie, and she was a purebred German Shepherd. And unfortunately, she died early. We had to put her down when she was only 8. But she still was that dog that I hold every other dog to.
That's tough. I mean, yeah, we had cats too. We had some bad cats. We had a great cat, and we had 2 more bad cats, and we don't have cats anymore. And I grew up with cats and loved them. We had dogs, but they lived outside. And so Maud is like our first household dog. Yeah, like she's just such a part of our lives in a way that I didn't imagine animals being, because I grew up on a farm. So there's that.
I could ask you all the questions about growing up on a farm, but that can be another episode that you can join.
That sounds good.
Transitioning to you have had almost over 20 years in comms, marketing, social media, and you said that you have felt like you have been in your own middle since you were laid off from Ford in 2018. Can you take us back really quick to that moment? Because a lot of our listeners are going through a layoff right now. Layoffs are really prominent right now. So what did your layoff feel like, and how did it change your career trajectory?
I mean, it was, as people are wont to say, an inflection point, right? That role had really run its course for me. And it was time to be doing something new. I needed to be pushed and, needed to get back out there. And, it was a shock, but everybody talks about resiliency. I think fewer people do it. And I was like, I've got this great network. It's time for me to lean into that. And I just started having conversations. Now, for anybody who's new to this, I cannot recommend enough time boxing all of this, because I was burnt out. And then I dove directly into full-time networking, and I was having 3 to 5 calls every day, varying lengths. People were super generous with their time, really eager to hear what I'd been up to, what I was interested in doing next. But I completely overdid it. And so that is one of my several warnings to anyone that I also have to remind myself of. Hey, yes, this is the right step to take. And really engage that network, and people want to help. I don't care when people say, if you haven't been maintaining your network the whole time, I don't want to hear from you. That's not really true. Generally speaking, people want to help you, but you've got to manage your time in a way that doesn't continue on that path of simply being burnout, albeit in a new context.
I think that's so relevant too, because you're right. The pressure to find a job is almost instantaneous. And especially in the market today, when you hear these stories of people going 6, 8, 12 months, maybe even, God forbid, a year or 2 without a job or a steady job, that pressure to just go right back into the frying pan, candidly, is so, I don't even want to call it maybe alluring, because it's not alluring. It just feels like it's what you have to do.
Well, it does. And it's because we're conditioned for it, right? We generally, especially because we work in communications, and I've spent a lot of my career on the crisis end of the spectrum. So there's a certain amount of being an adrenaline junkie where that has real appeal for me. And it's like a personality defect of mine that I've aligned that defect with the work I've chosen. But, when you get accustomed to that and you're in that steady state of being always on, it's very easy once you find yourself in this circumstance that fight or flight kicks in. So, right, that instinct is to set up those calls, to really dig in, overhaul all of your materials, and just get yourself back out there. And the reality is, for anybody who's on the market, like you can't scroll refresh new roles that are perfect fits for you into existence. Like that's not what you're going to manifest. Like you are going to be just like strapped to the machine all day, staring into the digital abyss, looking for that next role. And that's why you've got to shield yourself from that. Because, like you said, the urgency is there. We're built to be urgent. We're built to follow up and follow through. But there's only so much you can do when you're on this side of the table.
I would also say, JT, it's not a defect. What do they say in tech? It's a feature, not a bug. I also want to touch on, because you and I have talked about that in the job hunt, it's very easy, especially if you have been impacted. It is very easy to just find the next thing. It doesn't matter if you like it. It doesn't matter if it lines to what you want to do. But that can lead to, one, just job hopping all the time. And you don't really end up having a career. You just end up going from position to position. But it also can be these smaller misalignments, and it can really wear you down. I think you've called them bad fits. So I want to ask, have you had bad fits?
I think in fairness to anybody who's going through this, like this is my experience of it, but I think it's a common one where, you find a role, you're really excited about it, but there is sometimes that gap between the job you've interviewed for versus the job you've gotten, right? And so I think a few things about this, right? I think about like early in my career when, Gen X was sneering at millennials whom they considered job hoppers. And, I have training as a social scientist. I have a political science degree. And my instinct was to say, well, perhaps those people are responding to stimuli. And I'm reminded of a great quote from a defense reporter, Kelsey Atherton, where he says in like a clippy voice, "It looks like you're trying to resolve a structural issue with personal choices." And those are the things where, you really don't know something maybe is a bad fit until you're really into it. And I think that one of the common themes, right, is there's that honeymoon window, and you can have some really great experiences. You can accomplish a ton that can be a year long. Maybe it's longer, but in my experience, it's generally capped at a year. And then from that point forward, now you're in the day to day of that role. You're more, acculturated to the organization you've joined. And that's where you begin to see, the ceiling of possibility within that organization. And that takes a variety of shapes, but it's one where a friend of mine, Steve Lavner, who's a recruiter, he recently posted that, he's afraid that roles are turning into projects. And, I chatted with him the other day and said to him, like, honestly, like that's really been my experience. It's you get into something, you're in there, you do a lot of great work. And then you get to a point where, okay, like this is about as far as I can take it. And for the person who's in that role that may or may not be a bad fit, there's also that element of, hey, like what's next for me? Like, where's that career path? And I think for folks, especially in digital and social media, we really can be pigeonholed in that space, even as everyone's moving to digital, to social, to emerging platforms. We're still off on the side, doing some strategy work, but it's a lot of tactics and execution at a time where I think we ought to be further along the trajectory into those leadership roles. So I think that like all of those things come to bear when, you encounter something that you may find to be a bad fit.
I also think it goes back to, or it doesn't go back to, it goes hand in hand with this idea of personal branding and the personal branding of who they are. If you're an individual contributor, do you have that it factor? Do you have it? We call it executive presence, in the corporate America, but do you have that it factor really? I love something that you have said about personal branding, which is you've called it a false grail. Why do you think it's a false grail, and why do you think so many people have bought into this? Because if you look, especially in the market right now, a lot of people are, you just lost your job, make sure your personal brand is up to date. That's the advice that we're given. I was given that. So explain this more to me.
I mean, it's a false grail in the sense that it's really going to resolve that structural issue I mentioned, right? Like the labor market right now, there's a significant structural issue at play where there simply aren't jobs being created. And no amount of personal branding is going to overcome that. It will improve your visibility, don't get me wrong. But I think that one of the places where people are getting frustrated with platforms like LinkedIn is that they are committing themselves to personal branding with the expectation that there'll be outreach, that there'll be some inbound that they get from that. And I've found in my own experience, people definitely want to have conversations about it, especially if you've posted something that's a bit spicy. Like people want to take that offline and talk to you about it. Cause like, I loved what you said, but I can't say it online because my boss will see it. But I don't know that, for most people, investing themselves in personal branding in the way that is recommended to everyone is delivering the kind of results they seek. And I think I said, I have the misfortune of being a Philadelphia 76ers fan. And,
That is a misfortune, JP.
trust me, since 1983, we tanked to win the draft time and again. And we got pretty good, but we didn't get to where we needed to go. And at the time, a lot of teams were tanking. And once everybody starts doing the same strategy, there's not an easy way for you to stand out. I think the other aspect of personal branding, and one of the reasons I never invested significantly in it, is that in my career, investing in your personal brand was seen as a career liability. And within organizations, people, if they see you out there building that personal brand around, the topics that you're an expert in, there's, some internal discussion around where you're spending your time. And you get into that show pony versus workhorse conversation. Well, I'd characterize myself more on the workhorse end, but it didn't mean that my career hasn't been disrupted regardless. So that, those are some of the things when I think about personal branding, and also like just attention period, right? Like the things brands and people need to do to get attention today are so outrageous that it's hard to know like what that sweet spot is anymore where you're going to get that payoff. Plus, you really don't know what's going to animate LinkedIn or whichever platform's algorithm you're on in a given day. And unless it's like broetry and you're doing these line break posts that we've all been guilty of doing, but you get the idea that that those are the factors at play as you're trying to develop a personal brand. Again, I don't mean to say don't do this at all, but just pace yourself and understand that it's not the fix on its own.
I think 100%, because so many people feel pressured to brand themselves to survive. It's given as this, antidote, as the vaccine to, if you have this happen to you, well, just build your personal brand and you'll have that. And I'm going to touch on this later. We're recording this episode a week after the Charlie Kirk assassination. And one of the conversations I've had with a lot of people is, regardless of if you think he was a good person or a bad person, he may have had his beliefs, but at what point do you take the rhetoric up to an extreme? Because that is where social media has led us. The platform needs you to be extreme. The platform needs you to say something so incredible that because that's the only way and for people like Charlie Kirk, it's not just their brand anymore, it's their business. That's the only way to continue that business.
I just think about Eli and There Will Be Blood when I think about those situations where you've got this, evangelist character who's built a business around, this religious persona, and Daniel Plainview sees through it, and you get this really dramatic ending, in part because it was a gimmick, it was a grift. I think you're right in saying that some of this stuff, especially at a time of extremism, it only gets more extreme. Not, again, saying that murder is what the answer is, but, again, it's, you can't control all the people that are in the environment.
I think what it emphasizes is, while I didn't know Charlie Kirk, and I don't know a lot of people that have that many followers on a platform,
Sure.
the question becomes, are you chasing visibility or are you chasing meaning? And I think the platforms, in the way that they are built, and I want to touch on this in a minute, they are encouraging us to chase the visibility. They are teaching us that visibility equals meaning, but it's not that at all.
So, that's something I think about with respect to, again, the age-old question, make it go viral, JT. Well, we're actually like packaging styrofoam peanuts, and that's our latest innovation. Like, this isn't going to do anything on social. I'm sorry. I know it's very important news to the business, but we're not simply in a conference room. And this is something I think about when it comes to channel and content strategy. Something like that, where you're like, hey, these are these really new, innovative, styrofoam peanuts. And then you put it out against everything else that's happening online. And it's so much harder, to your point, to get that kind of attention because you're competing with everything everywhere all at once.
It leads to this accountability crisis, and it leads to this gap in what can actually be done. And then when it doesn't happen, was that even really the right thing to do or the right thing to measure? I think, and I know you have talked about the accountability crisis, I think that is its own middle of who we are and who we're told to be. Have you experienced the accountability crisis? And if so, where do you see it showing up?
There are any number of examples over the course of my career where really trying to set expectations about how something might perform, particularly on digital or social, is difficult to do because expectations were already set with another more senior stakeholder before it got to you. And then your mission is the trying to translate the art of the possible with yourself, with your team, with your peers across, again, a matrixed organization where you're, especially sitting in comms, you're passing the hat and seeing if there's marketing dollars available to help you accomplish some of these things. You're hoping there's a partnership with, some spokesperson or an influencer that you might be able to, pull in to pour some kerosene on that news. And, it doesn't always work. And again, I think, it comes back to, if, it's something seen to fail. Like, we talk a lot about failing fast and, test and learn. I think, most organizations actually fail very slowly, and they continue to kind of follow the inertia of, the instantiated habits within an organization where, oh, we've always done it this way. And that has diminishing returns over time. And you can measure that. And I think, a few things in my own experience that have been really valuable in how I process each of these roles that I'm in and out of has been to really reflect on what we're talking about. It's like, what was within like my scope of control, span of control. And that's where I end up saying things like, this post should have been a salon dinner. Again, just thinking about like how communications needs to evolve. And it doesn't mean that you really abandon any part of, the paid, earned, shared, owned model. It's just, I think you need to think differently about each of those and let, people who are responsible for those things be accountable for them. Like, that's what I think the role of communications ought to be doing beyond, proactive and reactive messaging and everything else that comes along with it. It's how can communications, again, in an effort to be more accountable, provide a feedback loop into the business that the business can absorb and respect.
I loved what you said too about we're encouraged to fail fast, but in the reality, a lot of companies are failing slow. I think nowhere is that more true than in tech. There's this seemingly identity shift with tech happening right now. The tech sector, they promise to disrupt the old guard and they promise to disrupt all of these companies. But today, they've kind of become the businesses they set out to topple. And I've heard you say that as well. What does that say about the cycle of disruptions? Are tech companies in their own middle right now?
Well, the academic side of me recommends everyone read Harold Braverman's Labor and Monopoly Capital. But, that's the life cycle of these things, right? When people are drawing the through line from a Sears to, an Amazon, those companies rhyme, right? In terms of like where they sit in the American lifestyle landscape, in that they're the everything store, basically. That to me is what's, really, really astonishing is how, today, especially with, growth at all costs being the most important thing, all these companies can really do is branch into new industries to continue on that trajectory. And I think, it's less about the businesses they are, it's more about the ethos, and I think that that's something that we're really seeing right now with, these rounds of layoffs and how much more draconian they've become. And, these cultures that, again, 10, 15 years ago, everyone saw as really rewarding, lucrative places to land that now maybe are on your like do not fly list, right? And I think that that's what's so fascinating is not just that those organizations became they became like those 20th century blue chips so quickly. It's also how quickly those cultures retrenched to something that sounds more like the companies my parents worked for when they were my age.
Hmm. And I would say, JT, let's talk about marketing fun because you and I both know those companies do a lot of vaporware. And for folks on the podcast that don't know, vaporware is basically when a company comes out and says, look at this new widget or tool or feature or whatever, but they actually don't really have it, or they are not at the point where they want you to believe they are. So let's talk about that, because how have you seen that play out? I know I have seen it played out. It was probably one of the most jarring things for me coming from an aerospace and defense company where that is not what you did. You didn't promise you had an airplane because it took decades to build the airplane. So going into tech and all of a sudden being like, what do you mean we don't have this ready to ship? What do you mean it's going to go GA in like 6 months? Like they can't get it now? So how have you seen that play out? And how has that shaped your perspective on meaningful work?
I think that, the vaporware, for better or for worse, has played a significant part in my career. And I want to be very clear, like, it's what drew me to it, right? Like, futurism is exciting. And especially like coming from, an editorial background, like I was always excited about what was on the bleeding edge of technology. But, once you're inside the organization, you're within the nervous system of the company and communications, you really begin to see, how far out some of this stuff is. And then, you begin to question. And a lot of the organizations I've worked for have understandably moved on from some of these initiatives because, they simply they weren't bets that were going to pay off in the long run. And, at a personal level, it's disappointing because that's what makes you excited to work for a place, right? Oh, wow, this is what I get to work, this is what I get to do versus this is what I have to do. And I think it can be a little demoralizing when time and time again, you're so excited to roll things out. And ultimately, media and the market don't respond the way you expect them to because they're not convinced you can execute. Again, it's, I shared with you, and this is me saying you should drop these links in the show notes, but, Corning's A Day of Glass, Corning ultimately developed glass that, is surrounds us, and it's touchscreens and it's our phone. But when they first published that video, it was, extremely vaporware, and it didn't matter because that video unto itself was the product that Corning wanted to market. And everyone started in my own case, certainly at Comcast, everyone wanted to have their own Corning A Day of Glass video. And that's not easy to do because it also, requires not just the execution on the back end, the credibility on the front end to be able to even say some of these things and for people to believe, oh, that company that typically makes these widgets is suddenly going to become something that does something entirely different.
Do you think the comms and marketing field is at a tipping point? Is the field in its own middle?
Oh, I mean, again, it's fascinating, right? I'm at a point in my life where, my peers are CCOs and CMOs, but I think that there's a lot still to be learned from the folks within the team that have lived extremely online for as long as someone like me has, because I think there's value in really knowing how things work at the operational level, and that sometimes is what's missing, particularly as middle management goes extinct. I think it's missing in that gap between your early career team and your senior leadership team, and the kinds of questions senior leadership has that can really be puzzling to someone who's lived their life online in the way folks who are early in their careers have. So I think most importantly though, the real tipping point is that there are disciplines. I've written about this, like to quote Eli Cash from the Royal Tenenbaums, it's an obsolete vernacular. And what do I mean by that? I mean that comms and marketing, are split because marketing was dealing with the advertising parts of publications and channels. And, there was separation of church and state, and comms talked to editorial. And now that everything is so pay to play, I think that both sides really would benefit from merging, joining forces. It's really messy operationally. I know that people like to have their own department that's unto itself for completely understandable reasons, but I think that like communications would benefit tremendously if they spent more time with folks who are media buyers, for instance, and really got a better understanding of audience development, of what it is when you're talking about targeting, what you're doing with ad tech, really getting a deeper understanding of all the things in the toolkit that need to be brought to bear to get as we were talking about earlier, get the kind of, attention the business wants and expects.
My second to last question for you, both at the, I would say, company and individual personal level, is being in the middle a powerful place to be?
I mean, personally, I think you learn a lot about yourself, right? You learn what you're genuinely capable of. I mean, I've spent, the last couple of years building my own business and getting to do things that I never would have done in a conventional job. And again, those are skills I can take back inside a company that just make me like so much better at what I do. And that's important to me. I mean, I get to become the person I haven't been able to become in some of these roles, and that's okay. Like that didn't work out that way. That's part of being resilient. I mean, I've seen recruiters talk about how people who've been in roles 5 years or longer are radioactive. And that's so alarming because so many people throughout my career have spent 5, 10, 20 years within some companies, and they're very talented people. But the way recruiters are looking at those candidates now is differently than they did 15 years ago. And now it's more a question of, well, why did you stay? Are you not ambitious? Is it because you've learned how to work one bureaucracy and that's as far as it's going to go? Versus someone who maybe has had some career disruption, maybe someone who has hopped around a little bit, because candidly, like that's how you get the best opportunities and earn the most money. So I can't fault people for chasing that. But, in my particular circumstance, like I've also learned like what I am looking for in leaders, like what I'm looking for in a company, what the what the philosophy around communications and marketing is, and if I vibe with it, right? Like those things are important because again, you don't have perfect information going into any role, but over time, you can at least know yourself well enough and learn about the organizations you've been in to know and have a good sense of like what to ask before you jump into a company in a role that might disappoint you.
One of our recent guests, Jen Whitlow, who I know we both know, she said in hers, every time she had felt like she failed or did fail, it gave that opportunity to reinvent yourself in a way, whether that was learn something new, but you were inevitably probably going to go into a different community. And she just asked herself, what can I do differently here? I kind of have an opportunity to not necessarily be a false person, but how can I take what I am and be someone different, be someone better than I was in this last community that I'm no longer a part of.
And I love that. And I think that, it goes in a bunch of ways. It's not just about who you are personally. It's being able to go into an organization with the understanding that every organization is different and it won't be one size fits all. So I really like that you can go in and be a different person of, and you can give yourself a nickname on vacation, but you can just take a very different approach when you're entering a new organization that again takes the lessons of the past and then finds creative new ways to apply them in the future.
For listeners that feel stuck in their own middle right now, what would you say to them?
Oh wow, I mean, that's a great question. I think some of it are just the truisms that you see everywhere, right? It's, know that, you're not your job, you're not your title. And disentangling your identity from that is really difficult because at least in the US, it's very much a mastery society where you're expected to be perfect from out of the gate, and that's unrealistic. And so you've got to give yourself that grace and understand that you're going to need to dust yourself off and get back on the horse again, but you'll get back on the horse again.
Well, we are at our lightning round.
Exciting.
Are you ready, friend?
I'm not. I'll try.
I don't share in advance, and I will admit, because you're so good at this, I intentionally picked lightning round questions for you that I have not asked anyone else because I know you listen to the podcast too.
Yes. Yeah, so, big fan.
My first question, JT, is cereal a soup?
No.
Why?
I feel,
what delineates a cereal and a soup to you then?
I mean, it's not a cold soup. I mean, is a hot dog a sandwich? A hot dog's a sandwich. I know. I don't think it's a soup. It's not, like the cinnamon toast crunch I poured for my youngest this morning, that's not a gazpacho. So no, I don't think it's a soup.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
I don't know that it's like a superpower as such. I think it's really just more a reflection of like, who I am and who I've been. And I think if there's something I aspire to, it would just to be kinder. So less about like flying or being able to make myself disappear, more about, hey, how could I be a better person, a better partner, a better parent? And again, it's just one of those things where I think when you reflect on, how often in life you need to be sharp with someone and how it makes everybody in that transaction feel, that to me, like that's the thing I still aspire to have as a superpower.
I love that. What is something that has made you happy today?
For anybody who's like stuck in the middle right now, I am finding that I'm having more productive conversations for roles, whether those are consulting opportunities or those are in-house. So, I've had a bunch of good news today and this week already that, I'm really excited about. So, again, like, as bizarre as this market is, there's stuff that's happening. Um, but, trust that, in it will come to you in its time.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
No, no.
I
I
agree.
mean, we've lived, I've lived in Michigan, so have you. To me, the ideal pizza is a Detroit style from Louis or Cloverleaf. That's not, or original buddies, not the other buddies, original buddies at Sixth and Conant. Um, with pepperoni. Like that to me is the perfect pizza. So no on pineapple, yes to Detroit style.
Have you ever taken a picture of your food and put it on social media, JT?
Yes, I have, maybe even recently posted food, probably on Instagram, but likely to my story. So it vanished. So that I'm going to give myself credit for.
Speaking of social media, TikTok or Instagram?
TikTok. TikTok. I mean, you've already got my data. I was part of the Experian leak. I mean, it can't get any worse. So no, I mean, as someone who's held many mortgages, the Experian leak far exceeds, the fact that I send, cute puppy and baby videos to my wife at all hours.
What was your first car?
1971 Volkswagen Super Beetle. It was an amazing car. I mean, it was a phenomenal car, just so much fun to drive. This was in, the mid 90s in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. I think I was the only kid in the high school lot with one. And everybody else had cool Ford Escorts and the girls had
Of course.
cabriolets. But, I had my 71 Super Beetle and I love driving that thing.
My first car was a 1984 Honda Civic or Honda Accord.
Sensible vehicle.
I'm going to blank on that one.
Sensible.
Bought it for $2,000, broke and completely died 3 months after getting it, which my parents hated because then they had to go buy another car for cheap. But it was just, so I wouldn't say it was a great car because my next car was a Toyota Corolla and I drove that thing into the ground. But they were decent cars. Have you ever asked someone for their autograph?
I have. I worked on a documentary. I helped introduce a documentary that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did, and so I met him, and definitely asked for his autograph. But shamefully, especially in my capacity as a music critic, I've met countless celebrities. Maybe the most famous of which is Mariah Carey. And like the only takeaway from when I met Mariah was that as we were leaving the studio, she was recording a Comcast commercial. She touched me on the arm, my left arm, and thanked me as if I was the person who managed the sponsorship. I certainly did not, but I accepted her thank you. I don't know that I said you're welcome. She was with Benny Medina at the time, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So really that was everything, but no, like very, very few autographs, generally speaking, because as I'm trying to, whether you're a music critic or you're in communications, there's that, professional distance that you're trying to maintain that keeps you from, just fangirling out.
My last lightning round question. What is one conspiracy theory you think is true?
Oh, this is good. It's not that the Earth is flat. It's not that we faked the moon landing. It has absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. I lived in New York. You may have stumped me. I don't know. I don't go in for conspiracies. I'll be honest. Why? Why do I not go in for conspiracies? Let me explain. It's because I've worked in communications and marketing, and I know how absolutely impossible it is to get everybody on the same page about anything, let alone manage a global. Why? I'm just trying to reveal a new vehicle in January in Detroit. That's hard enough, let alone, oh yeah, this is something everybody needs to keep a secret forever. Like, I don't believe this conspiracy, but it's probably my favorite conspiracy. And it's the one where people believe that Stevie Wonder can see. And he recently had to like issue probably the umpteenth statement in person that he is and has been blind. But the stories that celebrities in particular share about encounters with Stevie Wonder are delightful because Stevie Wonder is such a wonderful human being and spirit on earth. And then these celebrities encounter him and are starstruck. And then he does something that maybe only Stevie Wonder can do. And it surprises them and leads them to believe the man can see.
I can see that, but it's a good one. I mean, I would classify that as a conspiracy theory.
You can see that. Stevie can't.
Ha ha. Dad joke.
Womp. Guilty.
Before we go, where can people find you, JT?
Oh, they can find me extremely online. I spend an inordinate amount of time in the public relations subreddit. I am on Blue Sky. I'm still on X. I'm on Instagram. I'm pretty much anywhere but like Google Plus anymore. And I'm at JT Ramsay everywhere.
Well, I have loved having you on. It's always good to chat with you, but now actually doing it in a more on the record way than maybe we normally chat.
I thought this entire conversation was on deep background.
Oh, my friend, you're going to be surprised.
Okay. Well, worth a shot.
Seriously, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. I think you have some of the most spot on perspectives of anyone out there. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm glad to know you, and I'm glad that other people are going to know you after this.
Thank you so much. And seriously, I can't thank you enough for having the wherewithal to put together such a crucial podcast. And those words don't often connect for me in my lexicon, crucial and podcast, but I think you're really capturing something right now that is very much of the moment. And so, I really thank you for that and appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to The Middle. If today's story resonated with you, drop a subscribe, share the episode, and let's keep these conversations going. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over. You're just in the middle.